And you know, our society is unique because we can prop ourselves up. We have so many pills, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. But who knows the number of suicides we would have today if it were not for the ability to give ourselves a little bit of support. Because the emotions can take you right down to the bottom. And then there is spiritual pain. Physical pain, the pain of grief, emotional pain, and spiritual pain. Saul already knew that God had rejected him. You know, it's that moment where you've done something wrong and you realize the consequences that we talked about last week. That God cannot just push this under the cover, that he has to deal with it. And so God had rejected Saul and had a replacement waiting in the wing. 1 Samuel 13:14 says, "But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him leader of his people because you have not kept the Lord's command." Now, you know, it is one thing to be in a car and have a truck come and ram you and take the life of your child. It is another thing to be in the car drunk and run into a truck and take the life of your child. It is one thing to have your house burned down. And you go to church on Sunday morning and all your friends tell you they are praying for you. It is another thing to be angry at God, out of fellowship with believers, home alone, and your house burned down. Now, Saul's in the latter category in both cases. He is out of fellowship with God. Things are not going well, and the burden is so great spiritually. Saul knows that he is responsible. Now, think around you. Not look, but think around you. Who are the people in your life? Who are the people in your office? Who are the neighbors that are hurting? Maybe they have physical pain. There are people who commit suicide because they cannot endure the physical pain. Maybe the person is grieving. It would not be unusual to find someone committing suicide because their spouse died. Their child is gone. Maybe it's a person who is going through the loss of a job or some kind of social embarrassment, and this is an emotional pain. Or maybe there's someone you know who is hurting because he or she is out of a relationship with God. They don't pray, they don't read their Bible, they don't go to church, they don't believe God. And you see, I think God has called us to be sensitive to those people who are hurting, because our sensitivity can make the difference between life and death. And at the time we send someone to the Summit Counseling Center because they are, quote, suicidal, it may be too late. When you see someone who is hurting, let them know that you care. Let them know, as the song said, that you're taking them to the throne of God's grace and encouragement and power. Be there for that person. Suicide is usually caused by pain. Suicide is perceived as the easier way out, hence the sermon title, The Selfish Way. By human nature, we are designed to choose the easier way. Look at verse 4. Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and abuse me." Saul said to his friend, "Kill me, or my enemies will kill me." But he said, I want to be killed by a friend. I want the easier way. And haven't we all been there where there are times in life where we feel like that the road before us is so tough, we're not sure we want to keep walking. So tough that we can't pick up our foot to take the next step. And we say, you know, it might be easier just to call it quits. But taking the easier way is not the Christ-like thing to do. Not in any circumstances. We don't just give up because life gets tough. We keep applying ourselves. Even if it means not having an easier way for the family. Just because the stock market crashes or because your fiance dumps you, that doesn't mean life is over. We can't stop the process because it gets tough. And life is a process. Sometimes it's absolutely wonderful. And sometimes every movement of the process is accomplished with pain and suffering. God has a place where he wants us to be. And I hate to say this, but it's God's choice how he gets us there. Now, the old-timers used to use a more threatening phrase, God will bring you to your knees kind of mentality. Well, I tend to agree. I'm just saying that God has a divine plan for each of our lives. And the circumstances, whether it's to teach a class or to preach a sermon or to be a parent, the circumstances are not always going to be easy. The goal is divine and wonderful and will be a blessing. But getting there can really be tough. So, don't take the easier way. Christ wouldn't. Thirdly, suicide by a believer can become a moral, emotional green light for others who are going through difficult times. Verse 5, when the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died. Now, you know how you buy a red car, a red Corvette, and it looks like you see a red Corvette on every corner? Okay. So that is one of those things that you just become a little bit more sensitive to red Corvettes. They've always been there. But I personally think there is a pattern. And it's more noticeable in small communities. That if someone commits suicide, there are other people who get the idea that suicide is okay. That it's acceptable. And especially if that person is a believer whose life is committed to Jesus Christ. It's like if I did something to myself to end my life, then people all over this church and community would be saying, you know, if Brother Bill can take his life, then I can too. So to prevent that, I think we have to treat suicide like we treat any other sin. Just acknowledge that it's not acceptable to God, and it is a sin. And we treat it with the principle that Paul used when he said, if eating meat offends my brother, then I will not eat meat. So Paul would take this and apply it to say, you know, there is no hope for me. I feel like taking my life. But if taking my life offends one brother, then I cannot take my life. You know, we as Christians, whether we're good leaders or bad leaders, we are leaders. And people hold us up. Sometimes on a pedestal as an example to follow. But sometimes on a pedestal just waiting for us to fall as an excuse for them to do the same thing we did. And that covers every sin imaginable. So what I'm saying about this particular sin is no different than what I would say about any other sin. People will follow our example. And the purpose, the reason God has for us to be here, the reason for our being, is to have a positive influence on others. And how will we ever free ourselves from the false idea that earthly life ought to be pleasant, that we ought to live as if we were in heaven, that we ought to live somehow exempt from all the struggles and trials? Earthly life can mean experiencing a slow, painful death.